Hi there and welcome. This is Jennifer McGuire and I appreciate you stopping by. Today I'm sharing with you how to create easy shadow box cards. The best part of this is no specialty dies are required and you can make them in different sizes, and I will show several options today. You can also use whatever stamps and dies you may have, and it's a great way to create a card that really stands out, and there are little elements that will move. In addition to sharing different size examples, some of my cards are very clean and simple and some step it up a bit. So hopefully there's something here for you to try. Now my cards today feature the Hero Arts April 2021 My Monthly Hero Kit. Now I use these kits very often because the value is really great compared to the cost. In fact, with this particular kit, the value is over twice the cost. And all of the things included are things you can use over and over again. I also really appreciate that Hero Arts changes up the look and the theme each month, so there's always something different to look forward to. I love the style of this month's kit. It's very different than most cards I make, and so it was a fun challenge and really a great way to create clean and simple cards. There are also some other products that go along with these, which I'll show you, but this is everything in the kit. So it's a 6x8 stamp set, 3 ink pads, a blending brush, 3 full-size stencils, and coordinating dies. I wanted to show you a closer look at the 3 stencils. These all would be great on their own. You can just ink it up, rotate it, ink it up again and rotate it, and build some fun patterns. But you can also layer these 3 together to create really unique backgrounds. So here you can see how the sizing of each is the same so that they line up nicely. There are several different options. I will show a background using these 2 stencils today, but just keep in mind that there are many ways you can use them. All right, let's get started with our first example, which is a pretty clean and simple one. The overall size of this card is 4 1/4 by 5 1/2, and it is a portrait or vertical card. Here you can see what it looks like when it comes out of the envelope. It's flat, and as soon as you take it out of the envelope, it pops up thanks to the shadow box feature that I'll show you. Now I've done this feature in videos in the past, but I made it even simpler today and show different sizes. Now you can see there is an element in there that moves, the little butterfly. Now the stamp images that I used on this card are not actually from the kit that I just showed you, but rather the stamp set that's available as an add-on or just sold separately. This is the Hero Arts Bug You stamp set. I just love the butterfly in there and the sentiments. For this I'll be using the butterfly and the leaf, along with the coordinating dies. For a sentiment, I'm using one of the other new stamp sets. This is called You Lift Me Up from Hero Arts. Lots of great images in here, but the sentiment that says, flying by to say, I miss you, I thought would be perfect for this card. I almost used this one. This is the Line Art Flower stamp. I could have had the butterfly land on one of these flowers. The style is very similar, so I just wanted to show you that as a different option. All right, let's get started by doing the shadow box card. Again, the end size of this card will be 4 1/4 by 5 1/2. Now, if you're going to do this size, you want to start with 2 pieces of heavyweight cardstock that are 6 1/4 inches by 5 1/2 inches tall. Here's your little tip. You always start with cardstock that is 2 inches wider than you want your end card to be. I'll give the dimensions throughout this, but I just wanted to share that tip. Now on both of these pieces, you'll score a 1/2 inch and an inch from each end. So I did a 1/2 inch and an inch, rotate it, and do it a 1/2 inch and an inch again. And then I will do this to the other piece too. Now I do recommend a heavyweight cardstock for this. Because it's going to pop up, you want it to be strong. So if you're using a lighter weight cardstock, you'll definitely want to layer up to make sure you have like the strength along the walls of your shadow box. And I'll show ways to do that today. I will link to the cardstock that I use below. It's inexpensive and heavyweight and great for these shadow box cards. Now on each of these pieces, I'm folding along those score lines that we created, and you end up with this little zigzag piece on the side, on each side. This will be kind of like the springs that make your card pop up when you take it out of the envelope. So there you can see what the piece ends up looking like. And I'll do the exact same thing to the other piece. Basically, we'll glue these together on those little flaps on the edge, and that is what forms your shadow box. So this is a basic card that you could do whatever you want to it. I'm going to create a little basic circle window, but you can do whatever you want. I just write my personal message on the back of the card before I mail it to the recipient. All right, let's do a basic circle window here. I have 2 circle dies, one a bit bigger than the other. I'm using the bigger of the 2 to die cut from the top center of one of our pieces. So I am die cutting between those inside score lines. You can do whatever die you want here. You can do something interesting like a decorative window die, which I'll show you later. You could do circle, square, rectangle. You could even hand cut your own window if you prefer. Now remember how I said I like to build up some layers so the walls are strong? That's what I'll do here, and I'll actually create a nice little mat too. So I've cut a piece that is slightly smaller than 4 1/4 by 5 1/2. I'm holding it behind that window, and then I'm tracing the circle onto it. I'll now take the circle die that's slightly smaller than the one we used before, put it right inside of that pencil circle line, and run this through. That way, when I glue this in here, see, you can see that little bit of green peeking through. If you don't want that, use the same circle die for both of those holes. But I know many crafters have the basic stacking die sets for circles, squares, and rectangles, and this trick really works well. So now I'll glue this to the back of the card, so that'll be in the inside. No one will see it except for that little bit of green peeking out around the inside of the circle. And now the front of our card is much stronger. Now let's do the inside of our card. I wanted it so that when you look through the window, you saw light blue. So I have a piece of light blue cardstock here that I've cut again to be slightly smaller than 4 1/4 by 5 1/2. So it fits in that little area there. I also die cut some trees. Now these tree dies coordinate with the tree stamp in the My Monthly Hero kit, but I'm just cutting off the trunks and using them as clouds. Easy peasy and a great way to take your dies and use them creatively, get more use from them. Also, I didn't have to go looking for some cloud dies. Next, I'm stamping my sentiment on the front of our card. I really recommend doing this before you glue your card together. And I'm using my Misty stamping tool and black ink, along with the Flying By to Say I Miss You. Okay, now it's time to create this little butterfly that kind of moves as the card pops up. It floats in there, and that's thanks to a little piece of acetate. So off screen, I stamped and colored a butterfly and some leaves, basic coloring, nothing fancy. That's the nice thing about the style of these stamps. I then use the coordinating dies to cut them out. I use the coordinating dies to also cut an additional butterfly from plain white cardstock. Here you can see those pieces, and I also have a piece of clear acetate that's pretty heavyweight. I just cut it from some recycled packaging, and it is about 4 inches long by about 1/4 of an inch. Now on my plain white butterfly die cut, I'm putting some double-sided tape. Then I'll remove the release paper and take that acetate and put the end right in on top of that butterfly. Now I'm adding more adhesive and putting the pretty butterfly on top. So basically I have this piece of acetate sticking out from the butterfly, sandwiched between the 2 butterfly die cuts. Okay, now we can assemble our card, and you'll see more about that acetate and butterfly in just a moment. I like to put the front of the card on there so I can kind of see where my die cuts are going. I'm gluing the leaf directly to the inside of the card. I now want to add my butterfly. This is really easy to do and a great way to give movement to a shadow box card. So we have our acetate sticking out the left side of our butterfly. So I just need to glue that on the little flap on the left-hand side. So I have my card like this where the flaps are kind of sticking up, and I will take my little butterfly piece and try to get the positioning where I want it to be. So I'll just put it there. I want to make it look like the butterfly is landing on the leaf. And I'm putting some double-sided tape over that acetate piece over there on the flap. So you'll see right away that the butterfly has some movement to it. I just want to make sure I like the positioning, and then I'll press that down. All right, now we can remove the release paper from that piece of tape that's holding the acetate there. And then I'm putting glue all along that little flap on the side. I like to use a strong liquid glue so I can kind of move it and wiggle it till it's lined up, but double-sided tape works also. I'm now taking the flap from our front of our card and lining those 2 flaps and squeezing them together. So the acetate piece is sandwiched between. and I can trim off the excess that sticks out. All right, next we're going to do the same on the other side, gluing those flaps on the edge together. So you can see it's really easy to put a shadow box card together. And I like having that little piece of acetate on a little die cut because you get this fun movement and it wiggles in there, but you could skip that to save time too. I decided I needed 2 more leaves on the card, so I glued one to the inside and then one that is glued to the opening, right to the back of the opening on the front of the card. So that is up front. So we have lots of dimension here. We have a leaf up front, leaves way in the back, and a butterfly that's floating in the middle. Such a fun effect and a great card to display. All right, let's look at the completed card. It comes out of a regular envelope just fine. And when you take it out, those side pieces that we created, those little Z pieces, they force the card to pop up. So you get that dimension right away and it stands nicely on display. You can see the butterfly also moving and wiggling. Super fun. And all I do is write my personal message on the back of the card. You could also glue a card to the back of this, but I don't think it's really necessary. I did add drops of glossy accent to the circles on the butterfly wings, and also added a few clear gemstones in the background just for some added interest. I hope this card shows you that interactive or shadow box cards like this can be really easy to do. All right, let's do another example. This time, the overall card size is 5 by 7, and it's a landscape card. I know many of you do 5 by 7, and I'm really liking that size lately, so I wanted to be sure to include it. In addition to using the kit on this card, I also used the new Hero Arts Graphic Reef stamp set. I like that the style of all these stamps goes together very nicely. I also love the sentiment that says, "You are for sure my favorite person," but I decided to use "long time no see" on this one. Now to do a 5 by 7 shadow pop-up card, you want 2 pieces of cardstock that are 5 inches by 9 inches. Remember how I said earlier, just add 2 inches to the width? That's what I got here. So 5 by 9. And again, I'm scoring at a 1/2 inch and 1 inch from both ends of each pieces of cardstock. So the front and the back of these are the same. On all of my examples today, I used white cardstock, heavyweight white cardstock for the front and the back, but you definitely could use colored cardstock if you want. You could even use pattern paper, but I do recommend making sure you add additional cardstock behind a pattern paper because pattern papers are usually pretty thin. So here you can see how I fold one way, fold the other, and it creates those little springs on the side. So this is coming together just like our last one, but in a 5 by 7 overall size. Okay, for this, I want a large oval window on the front. I again have 2 oval dies, one slightly bigger than the other. I'm using the bigger one to cut into the front piece of our shadow box. The smaller one will be used to create the mat, which you could skip if you wanted to, or use the same size die. To do the mat, I have a piece of blue cardstock that is slightly smaller than 5 by 7, and I'm using the slightly smaller oval die. So I'm doing the same trick that I did on the last example. I hold it behind the window, then I trace the window onto this blue piece. Then I can take the small oval die and put it into that traced oval and run it through my die cut machine. But before I glue these together, I have a sentiment that I want to stretch across the window. So off screen, I stamped my sentiment and matted it with blue cardstock. Now I'm gluing this behind our front window. So I'm using my grid panel on my work surface to make sure I get it kind of centered and straight, and I'm gluing it to the back of that oval window. Now I'll take our oval mat piece and glue it behind that so that our sentiment is sandwiched between these 2 layers, and it gives a nice way for the sentiment to stand out on the card because it's stretched right across the front. Off screen, I did some basic stamping of 3 fish and 3 coral reef pieces. Now the nice thing again about this style stamps is you just stamp with 1 color and you're good to go. But I wanted to make my sun 2 colors. So here's the trick I did. I stamped the sun with Hero Arts Butter Bar ink first. Then I stamped it again with orange soda. That way I have 2 different colors I can put together. I found a circle die that was the size of the circle inside of our sun. I lined up a negative space piece with the circle. Then I popped my circle die into that. That just helps me to line the circle die up so I can cut it out just the center. Now I can glue that to the center of our yellow sun and we have a 2-tone image. Another element that I wanted to add to the ocean scene is some waves. And I thought I would use my Hero Arts Cloudy Sky Scene dies to create waves. So these are meant to be clouds, but I'm using them creatively. I first ran them through my die cut machine. Then I took the dies and lined them back up, but slightly offset. See how I'm offsetting a little bit? Then running it through again. This cuts thin little pieces that look like waves when you have them upside down. I'm always looking for ways to use my dies creatively so I can get more use from them. These cloud dies are the same ones that I used in my last video along with the rainbows. So I cut several of these pieces. This is also a great way to use up some scraps. And now I have little waves that I can add to our blue background. Okay, so I want to figure out where the top of my ocean should be. And I figure right about there, I did a little pencil mark. And I'm using my cloud dies again, but this time to create the top of my ocean. So I'll do this in bits and pieces because this cloud die is pretty fluffy. So I just cut once. Now I'm moving it over and cutting it again until I eventually have a wave-like pattern going across the top. So there you can see the results. And now I can have our little wave die cuts. Now I could have saved time by stamping some waves on there using one of the images from the sets that I've shown you in this video. However, I enjoy the process of using my products creatively. I like that. I feel like it helps build my creativity or work my creativity muscles. So I like to include that in the video, but you could definitely stamp if you prefer. So I glued that background into our card, so that'll be on the inside back there. And then I added my little die cuts and I tucked the little coral reef pieces so they're on the front of the card along with the sun. Now we have our 3 fish. I was going to have all 3 move, but decided to only have the 1 move. I'll glue 1 to the front of the card, 1 to the inside, and then have 1 move. So here's the one I'm going to have move. So I'm putting adhesive on the back of him, then putting the end of a piece of acetate. It's about a 1/2 inch wide. Really doesn't matter, just as long as it's strong. Now I have another fish die cut that I'll glue behind that. So the end of the acetate is sandwiched between my 2 fish die cuts. So now I'll test it out in there, and just to show you how much I overthink, I decided I wanted this orange fish on the bottom left and I wanted the yellow fish to move instead. I don't know why. Just decided that. So I just took the piece apart carefully, and now I will add the yellow fish on top of the acetate. I make these changes a lot and I usually edit them out, but really if you're careful you can take things apart and change them up so you're happier with the results. It's all about enjoying the process. Okay, so now we can glue this guy up here. So I just will hold it right where I want it to be, and then I'll take a piece of double-sided tape. Anything strong would work here. And put that over that acetate piece, right on that flap. So it's only adhered by that flap. I glued my other fish in place, and now we can glue the sides together. So I'm putting adhesive on the flap over here on the right, and I'll glue it to the front flap. So I'm really squeezing that together, making sure it's glued together well, and we can cut off the excess acetate that's sticking out. So again, that the end of the acetate is sandwiched between those 2 flaps. Now we can glue the other 2 flaps together on the other side. Again, be sure this is a strong liquid adhesive or double-sided tape. You really want these sides to stay together. Now I felt like this needed a little bit of contrast. It needed some pops of black to kind of stand out along with the sentiment. So I'm using some little black baubles and adding those for eyes on the fish. And then I also used little bird die that's included in the Cloudy Sky die set from Hero Arts to create some little birds in the sky. All right, so here's the completed card. Overall size is 5 by 7. When you take it out of the envelope, it pops up and you can see the fun movement that you get. It stands up nicely. You can write your personal message on the back. I also added a few clear gemstones to be bubbles coming up from the fish too. I feel like adding those embellishments is just a great way to add detail to really make your card stand out. So I kept my first card pretty simple, but on this one I decided to kind of form a scene there. If you like building scenes on your cards using different stamp sets and die cuts, this is a really fun way to step it up by doing the shadow box. All right, I really liked that 5 by 7 size, so I thought I'd do another example like that, but change up the images I used. For the inside background, I wanted to use a couple of layering stencils in the kit, and it really worked out great. So I'm starting with a light pool cardstock and adding a soft blue ink over this particular stencil here. I'm using a blending brush, just a very light amount of ink. I don't want this to be too distracting in the background. Now I'm taking the same stencil, rotating at 90 degrees, and applying a different color. So the first one was Sky Blue from Hero Arts, and this time I'm using, I believe it was Gina Sea Breeze ink, which is a light turquoise. So you can see how just by rotating the stencil I can build up a fun pattern. Next I'm coming in with one of the other layering stencils. This one's my favorite, and it looks cool rotated too. But in this case I lined it up with what I've already done, and now I'm using an ink blending tool and a white pigment ink to really get white ink into the little nooks and crannies of the stencil. Now you can kind of see it on this light cardstock. Again, I want this to be subtle. But to make that white ink shine, I'm adding Perfect Pearl pigment powder. You just use a clean brush and kind of apply it over the wet ink. That white pigment ink stays wet because it is a pigment ink until you heat set it. So while it's wet, I'm adding this powder over it. That way, all of those lines that I created with the white pigment ink will have some shine to it. So I wipe off the excess, and then I did spray a fixative on this outside. You really don't have to, but I like to be just safe, and I'll link to my fixative below. Okay, now it's time to create the walls of the shadow box card. It is exactly the same as my last card. I started with 2 pieces that are 5 inches by 9 inches. And I scored a 1/2 inch and inch from each end of both of those pieces. So again, the trick to this is to start with 2 pieces of cardstock that are 2 inches wider than the card you want to make. I want a 5 by 7, so I started with 5 by 9 inch cards. And there you can see the shadow box again. This time I used a rectangle die to cut from the front of the shadow box. I just think it's fun to kind of change up what shape I use for the window. I have my inked piece here that I've trimmed down to be slightly smaller than 5 by 7, and I'm gluing it to the inside back of our card. I love the subtle shine that offers. I'm adding a piece of green cardstock right along the inside bottom to act as grass. I'm keeping this very kind of graphic and clean and simple because of the style of our stamps. Now off screen I stamped a cat and a dog, and I die cut it, and I cut additional die cut of each from white cardstock. I am again sandwiching a piece of acetate between them. You can see the acetate sticking out on the right from the cat and the left from the dog. That way both of these elements will move together and apart in our card. So I'm taping the acetate sticking out at the left of the dog over to the left flap. Then I will tape the acetate sticking out the right of the cat to the right flap. So these will kind of move together and apart as the card opens, and they'll wiggle in there too. Now we can glue the flaps together on both sides, and that will again sandwich the acetate between both sides. So there you can see the fun movement of the cat and the dog. I did decide I wanted a blue mat around the inside front of the card of that window. So I have a 5 by 7 piece, a little bit smaller than 5 by 7, where I die cut a rectangle that was a bit smaller, just like I did with the examples earlier. That also adds some stability to the front of our shadow box card. Next, I took a border cloud die cut and stamped a sentiment, and now I'm adding that to the inside of the card. I decided to put it on the back so that it kind of draws your eye towards the inside so you can see a little bit of that sky that we created with the stencils. So here's the completed card. All I did was add black little baubles to the eyes of the cat and the dog. I love how they move. It looks like their tails are kind of wagging there. The card stands up nicely. And although you don't see it in the video, you can see the shine on that background I did on the inside. I did cover a lot of it up, but that's because it was really just supposed to be a backdrop to our scene and to add some interest. But if you look carefully, you can see the shimmer in there on that inked lines that we created. So really, you could use a lot of different products together to create a shadow box card. Okay, my next example has 3 elements that move and is a mini Slimline shadow box card. For me, when I make mini Slimline cards, I like to make 3.5 by 6 1/4. So to do a shadow box of this size, I start with 2 pieces of cardstock that are 5.5 by 6 1/4. And once again, we'll score a 1/2 inch and an inch from each end of both of those pieces, just like we've done many times in today's video. I then will fold those side flaps so we have the little Z on both sides of each piece, and there we can see our shadow box card. It's just tall and narrow. Now for the window on the front of this, I'm using my Simon Says Stamp mini slimline rectangle dies because the proportion is just right, but you could use a craft knife and a straight edge to cut that window any size you want. I also have a piece of light gray cardstock that is 3.5 by 6.25, and I use the same rectangle die to cut from the center of that. I'm gluing this piece right onto the front of our panel. This way there's some added stability there, it's making it stronger, but that front scene will be gray and the flaps on the side will be white. It's just another fun way to add a little bit of color to this. I like using light gray cardstock because it's a nice backdrop or addition to bright colored images, which I'll be using. I wanted to create a black frame around that window. So here's a trick I did. I used the same rectangle die and I'm lining up right on the edge of my black cardstock so that the edge of the die is lined up with the edge of the cardstock. And then I use my pencil to trace around the other two sides. Now I will go and cut this on those two pencil lines. And you end up with a black rectangle that is the size of the die, which is slightly bigger than the opening it will cut, which you'll see here. So now I'm lining it up. You can see how the outside lines up with the outside of the die. Run it through my die cut machine and check it out. I have a thin black frame. So now I can add this right around the opening of that window. That's just an easy way to add a frame to a window on a card. And I only needed one die to do that, the one size rectangle. All right, next I have a piece of cardstock that will go into the inside of the card. So this is slightly smaller than 3.5 by 6.25. And I'm stamping this new Hero Arts background stamp on it using a very, very light gray ink. This is Fawn Jellyfish. Now I stamped it a few times just so it'd show up more, but it's kind of hard to see in the video, but I promise it's there and you'll see it a bit later. I also stamped 3 butterflies using an image from the kit. I wanted these butterflies to be 2 colors each, so I'm using an old used Post-it note to cover up half of the butterfly. Then I can ink it up and stamp it. That way I'm inking up half of the butterfly one color, then the other half another color. Old Post-it notes are perfect for this, or you can use like just printer paper for this. You want something thin so that you don't have like a little edge where the ink doesn't reach. So this time I'm masking the top and inking the bottom of the butterfly with a blue ink. Notice I'm double stamping my images. That's because I usually reach for lighter colors, so I can double stamp them to make them a little bit darker. It's easier to go in that direction than start with really dark and wishing you had used light. All right, so I did this with 3 butterflies. Each of them were different colors, so I could kind of build a rainbow scene of butterflies on my card. Once I was done, I die cut each of them and die cut 3 extra butterflies from white cardstock. Each of these will have acetate on them, but first I want to add my sentiment. So I'm kind of planning out where everything will be on my card, just laying them there in my MISTI. Then I can line up my sentiment there, and then we can stamp that right in the right place, and I stamp that with black ink. Those butterflies are just laying there just to make sure I get the spacing right. Now I'm using a black pen to trace over the bodies of the butterfly. I just felt like I wanted that contrast on these. And I also thought I wanted a little dimension, you know me, so I'm adding some of those black baubles to the top of the antenna and then also to the bodies of the butterflies. It just made them stand out against this light card, and it adds that little bit of shine. Okay, so now we can assemble everything. I needed acetate on the back of each of these butterflies. On 2 of the butterflies, the acetate sticks out to the right, and on 1, it sticks out to the left. So here you can see how the acetate is sticking out there, taping it on the flap. I did the acetate in between the 2 die cuts as I showed you several times in this video, so I skipped that part to save time. Now the 3rd butterfly has acetate sticking off to the right, so I'm taping it on that right flap. We can remove the release paper and now add some liquid adhesive along both of those flaps so we can glue the front and the back together. And we have 3 butterflies that are moving here, so nothing's glued to our background on the inside. They all are floating with the acetate. So I just used scissors to trim off the excess acetate and we're good to go. So here is the final card. It is 3.5 by 6.25, fits in a mini Slimline envelope, and I'll link to some of those below. You can see how the 3 butterflies are all floating and wiggling in there, and as the card pops up, you can see that movement. This will stand up nicely. I can write a message on the back, and I did add a few clear gemstones to the inside just for a little bit of shine and sparkle. I also think this is a good example to show that you can have many elements moving in there. All you need is that little acetate strip sticking off the side. Also, this shows that when you have bright colored images, it looks really nice against a white and light gray background with pops of black. I have one more example to show you, and this one shows that you can use a specialty window die on the front of a shadow box. But the shadow box still comes together like I've showed you many times in this video. This card size is 4.25 by 5.5. So I followed the same instructions that I did on the butterfly card at the beginning of this video. Same measurements. But instead of cutting a circle in the front, I used the new Hero Arts Soft Landscape Window Fancy Die. I love this style of this. I'm really a big fan of these type of window dies, and it works great for a shadow box card. So I cut that from the front of our shadow box piece. Again, the measurements for this are the same as the butterfly card. The overall card size will be 4.25 by 5.5. Next, I have a piece of white cardstock that's slightly smaller than 4.25 by 5.5, and I'm covering it with some cardstock scraps. I had these scraps on my desk, and I loved the colors, so I thought I'd use them for a bold, quick background that will show through that shadow box card window. I will then trim off the excess, and this can get glued onto the inside of our shadow box. The other thing I created is a stamped dragonfly from the main kit. I stamped that and die cut it, and now I'm gluing a piece of acetate to the back of that, and then another dragonfly die cut. So again, it is a die cut with a piece of acetate sticking out the left side, just as we've done many times in this video. Now we can glue the pieces together. This large piece will get glued to the inside back. And remember, all of those inky backgrounds you have left over sitting around, use them on a shadow box card. It's a great way to add a little bit of color on the inside, and you can use any stamped images with it. All right, now it's time to add our little dragonfly. So I'm lining up the acetate with the flap over there on the left, putting some tape over it. Then we can add some glue to both of those flaps and then glue the 2 halves of our shadow box together. Super easy to pull this one together, and it uses up some scraps I had laying around. I did add a few pink pearls to the inside background, and there you can see the completed shadow box card. I didn't add an extra layer to the front of this, so you could see how it was a little warped there. That's because the front is just 1 layer thick. I may go back and add a little bit of strength behind that, but for now, I'm going to leave it as is. The sentiment for this one is also from the main kit. All right, so I hope this video showed you how easy it is to create a shadow box card of different sizes and use different products with them. If you are interested in a shadow box Slimline card, I do have a video that shows some ideas for that, and I will link it here at the end, along with another shadow box card video. I'm hoping that the tips I shared here will show you that shadow box cards don't have to be intimidating. They can be easy to do and can be kept clean and simple. If you're interested in any of the products I talk about, they are linked below in my YouTube description. I always put them there. You can also go to my blog for photos of all of these cards up at the top right. And in the middle are those 2 other shadow box videos. Thanks for watching. I hope you have a wonderful week and stay safe.